The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
31 years after Erik and Lyle Menendez stood trial for the shotgun murders of their parents, this controversial and tragic case still captivates the world of true crime. Both brothers, each serving life sentences, claimed self-defense, citing a history of horrific abuse at the hands of their father. Now, high-profile figures continue to advocate on behalf of the Menendez brothers, believing that they deserve another chance at justice as new information comes to light and docuseries and crime drama adaptations of their story are released. I'm Vinny Politan. Welcome to the Court TV podcast. This week, we're taking you back to 1993 with the first day of Lyle Menendez's testimony. Hear his firsthand account as he tearfully details the alleged sexual abuse he suffered from his parents.
This is the Court TV podcast with Vinny Politan.
And we have both jury panels back in the courtroom and everyone else is present. The defense may call its next witness.
Defense calls Joseph Lyle Menendez.
Your last name.
Joseph Lyle Menendez, Menendez.
Mr. Menendez, are you related to Erik Galen Menendez, who's seated here?
He's my brother.
And were your parents Mary Louise Menendez and Jose Menendez?
Yes.
And were you born January 10th, 1968?
I was.
If you look to the right, you will see various photographs of homes that you lived in. Do you recognize that chart as something you've seen before?
Yeah.
Do you remember the Wexford Terrace home in which you are pictured in a bassinet? The one in New York?
No, I don't.
And do you remember Cedar Grove, New Jersey? The second photograph.
No.
Is the first home you remember Hinsdale, Illinois?
Yes.
For the record, could we have the exhibit number, please?
Well, we'll get it later on. That's the exhibit that has photographs of various houses on it.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Can you remember when you lived in Hinsdale, Illinois?
Yes.
And what do you remember from that point in time? Do you remember your father?
Yes.
What do you remember about your dad from that period in time?
I remember in the winter, and I remember lots of things.
Do you have any particular good memories of your dad at that point in time?
Yes.
Could you tell us one?
I remember the little dog, Tristesse. I was a puppy at that time. I remember her and my dad playing in the snow and me running out to my dad and jumping on him and playing in the snow. I remember riding my bike.
Did your Aunt Terry and Uncle Carlos live nearby?
They lived across the street.
And did you used to ride your bike over to their house?
Yes.
And do you remember your little brother living in that house with you?
Yes.
And do you remember anything with regard to your little brother and him going over to your aunt and uncle's house?
I remember going over to get him when my mom told me he was over there. He wasn't supposed to be. Go get him and bring him back.
And do you have good memories of your mother also? Can you remember anything good about your mother?
Yes.
What do you remember that's good about your mother?
I remember in this house.
No, not necessarily.
Actually, vague and irrelevant.
Why don't you try to focus a little bit?
Do you have something in particular that stands out in your mind that's a good memory of your mother?
I remember Christmases. She was always up, it seemed, and she would be up when I got up, and she would take us down to open the presents, even though my dad would sleep in. So we got to do that. That was usually a nice day. And I remember her taking care of the birds that would hit the window. Especially in Muncie, the birds would hit the window and be kind of like hurt or wounded in some way. And she would put them in a special cage she had for birds that did that. And she was just amazing with the birds. And I remember watching.
Did you love your mom and dad?
Yes.
And on August 20th, 1989, did you and your brother kill your mother and father?
Yes.
Did you kill them for money? Is that no?
Answer?
No.
Did you kill them because you wanted to pay them back for the way they had treated you?
Excuse me, I would object to that if you're waiting.
Overruled.
No.
Why did you kill your parents?
Because we were afraid.
Do you have a lot of nice memories from your childhood?
No.
Did you get to spend time at your grandparents' house?
Yes.
And was this your father's mother and father? Said yes.
Yes.
What was good about being at your grandparents' house?
Everything was good about it. My grandmother was wonderful. And we stayed in bed all day and watched TV. And, just be like a never-ending stream of foods that we weren't supposed to eat. And we watched my grandfather would come in whenever the Untouchables came on. We would watch that, and it would be a big deal. And then we'd go out, and the house was great. She had a magnolia tree outside. We'd climb up that, play with her in that, and there'd be a little patio that was enclosed, and squirrels would be jumping from tree to tree, and my grandfather would laugh and tell us stories, and we'd watch that. We'd go to garage sales with my grandmother. There's lots of things.
Was this different from the life you had in your own home?
It's like a different world from my house.
You said you have some memories of the Hinsdale home. You remember riding your bike and bringing your brother back. You were about 4 years old when you moved out of Hinsdale, is that right?
Yes.
And then you moved to Muncie, is that correct?
Yes.
And once you moved to Muncie, did sports become an important part of your life?
Well, they were everything to my dad, and that was my whole life at that time.
And was doing what your father wanted of you important?
That's what made him happy, and that's what I wanted to do.
Why did you want to make him happy?
So he would love me.
What's the first sport you remember getting involved in on an organized basis?
Swimming.
Can I have the lowest photograph? How old were you when you started swimming?
think 4 years old.
And was this just a matter of going to the pool and swimming for fun, or was this more organized?
No, we had a coach, and my mom would take us. And in the winters, we would go indoors and practice with the older kids. Or actually, that was just me at that point. Eventually, my brother and I.
And is this something where you had a half-hour lesson every week, or was it more frequent than that?
In the summer, it was every day, and in the spring, probably almost every day. But in the winter, it was whenever the classes were, the practices was just like 3 times a week. And then sometimes my dad would take me on his own.
Now, when your dad would take you on his own, was it the same type of training session that you'd have with swimming teachers, or was it different?
It was very different because swimming, basically the coach just is calling out the laps or the kind of things that you should do, and he might occasionally come over and help someone that's having a problem with a particular stroke or something of that sort. But with my dad, it was very, it was one-on-one, and he'd stay in the pool with me and swim next to me, and sometimes we would play, or it would just be him and I for, usually they gave you an hour. It was like hour free time swimming, and I would take that time to train with my dad.
And were these good times for you or bad times?
Sometimes it was good.
And sometimes it was bad? And what was it like when it was bad?
Well, I didn't really like the swimming. And sometimes he was rough with the swimming.
What do you mean he was rough with the swimming?
Objection irrelevant.
I'm sorry?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled. You may ask your question.
It was like they were just drills, and I would swim laps, and sometimes he would just yank me out of the water by my hair, and he would shake you, and he took it very, very seriously. He was training to be an Olympic swimmer at one point, and so he had all kinds of different methods and how to expand your lungs and how long I should be able to hold my breath. And we practiced him holding me under the water, how long I could take it.
What do you mean how long you could take it? Would he say, I'm going to hold you under for 30 seconds and then you go under, or what would that be like?
We would go under, and I would fight him to get air, and then he would give me air. And we would keep doing that, and I would be able to do it less and less time. And it was very rough. And
what do you mean you would fight him to get air?
I would just push away from him or pinch him or do whatever I could, hit him underwater. My dad was unaffected by all that, so it didn't. That's what he wanted me to do. He wanted me to fight to get air so that I could go beyond what I would normally just take if he said stay underwater as long as you could. And this would expand my lungs. And there were other things that made it, for me, rough. And I just was so nervous about swimming. It wasn't just my dad either. Just the practices themselves made me very nervous. The older kids the guy would be blowing whistles, and you would have to dive in. And I didn't like the water. It was always very cold. And it was, for some reason, I didn't like it.
When your dad would hold you under and make you fight to get air, how would you feel when you finally got up to the surface?
just relieved to get air.
Would you physically have any effects?
I would be crying. This would be very rough, like I said. And
what did your dad do when you'd come up crying?
take a short break. We usually wait 30 seconds or so. We'd do it again.
And how many times would you do these lung-expanding exercises?
That way, we wouldn't do it too many times. And we would try to do it a couple times a week. And then we would test a couple times a week if I could go farther, like swim a whole lap underwater and then come back, and how far I would get. And we would try to go farther.
And what ages were you when these exercises were going on?
I'm not sure, but by between 6 and till about 10, I would say, maybe a little bit longer.
And do you have any other memories of swimming that are painful for you?
The whole thing was very bad for me, and mostly I remember pleading with my mother not to take me, stalling so I would be late, incredible stomach aches, I think from the nerves, where I would be nauseous and I would vomit.
What would your mom say when you'd ask her to not make you go?
She would just say, "Get ready, let's go." And she would always threaten me with telling my dad. But when it came to the swimming, I was pretty resistant. I didn't seem to care as much as I did normally. I was pretty crazed about the swimming. It made me so nauseous and nervous. The drilling, the intensity, the underwater stuff was very hard for me. I remember purposely swimming into the wall in practice so that I would be injured, so that the coach would say, "Okay, you can sit in the locker room and miss the afternoon sessions." And I would do all kinds of things anything to get out of it.
Was there any particular reason that swimming was so important? You said your father had trained.
Well, my grandmother, I had heard, was a champion swimmer. Even my dad's sisters, who were less into sports, were very good swimmers. And he was training to be an Olympic swimmer at the time that he had to leave Cuba. And he felt he could have gone all the way. And at least in the beginning, he felt that I could. And then that just clearly wasn't going to be.
Did you start playing soccer at some point in time?
Yes.
How old were you?
I was, my grandfather was out there with my dad, working with me by the time I was 5 also.
Did you like soccer?
I really like soccer.
Your Honor, I have 3 pictures I'd like to put up which have already been marked. They're exhibits 192, 193, and 194, if I may approach.
And also, perhaps you can identify the exhibit by the number on that one that we've had reference to already.
This is exhibit 148.
How long did you play soccer?
Until I was in my 11 years old, between almost 12.
Was your dad as involved in your soccer playing as he was in your swimming?
Yes.
And what kind of involvement did you have? Or did he have with your soccer? Just coming to the games, or was he more involved in that?
No, my dad was there whenever I played soccer, which we usually reserved for when he was there, because it was technical for him. He had a certain way he wanted me to play, and didn't feel it was productive for me just to be kicking a ball around when he wasn't there. So soccer, I waited till he was around.
Now, when you were playing soccer, I presume there was a coach?
Not when I was 5, but eventually there was, like by the time I was 7, I would think.
And once you were on an organized team with a coach, did your dad's involvement stop?
No.
Well, how would your dad behave when you were playing organized soccer?
In practices, he would be very involved, and the coaches would allow that. Pretty much it would be like a private lesson with him, and then the team was playing also. You know, he would be yelling things from the sidelines. Sometimes he would come out and grab me and take me off the field and talk to me and put me back in. And the coaches would pretty much ignore him, both of us. And we would play. And I was getting a lot of extra training. And so I was at a level where it seemed like that was why the coaches would be tolerating that, because I would be one of the better players when the game started, and a big help to the team. So they basically just let my dad do what he wanted to do. And,
Did you get to be friends with the other kids on the team?
no, not really.
Why not?
I just didn't spend any time with them, and my dad didn't want that.
Why not?
It's just part of his philosophy. If I started becoming friendly with these other players, I wouldn't be competitive.
If your team lost, would they all get together and go to the pizza parlor afterwards, even though they lost?
They would.
Did you get to go?
No.
What was your dad's philosophy about that?
He was very belittling of the coach for allowing and the players to be going to pizza parlors to hang out after a loss. And he believed all through sports that the people that win are the ones that hate losing. And the idea that there would be smiles on kids' faces after they lost a game was really, he's just outrageous to him. And if I even went near anybody, or, you know, I had to look, and would purposely look pretty devastated after matches, pretty similar to that picture, that my dad would be satisfied, because he would be very angry.
Did your dad take losing a soccer game when you're 8 years old as seriously?
It was very serious to him.
Why?
Well, partly because of what I said before, he had his own dreams, and he wanted me to achieve those, and because I was the most important thing in his life. And what I did was serious.
Why were you the most important thing in his life?
I don't know, that's just the way it was.
Did it have something to do with your place in the family, or was your brother as important to him as you were?
No. My brother was unimportant.
How could you tell that?
He pretty much believed in, well, he did believe that the firstborn was the one that carried the line. I carried my dad and his dad and his dad and his dad's first name, Joseph or Jose. And that was really all he cared about. And to some degree, I felt that was similar feelings from my grandparents and everybody around, that the focus seemed to be on me, and that might be partly because my dad's focus was on me, but I'm not really sure why else. So
you got a lot more attention than your brother, is that right?
I had his complete attention, and I don't think my brother, I didn't even think about my brother really didn't even exist for me until later in life. I don't think either of us thought about Erik too much.
So he was just ignored?
He was not completely ignored. Dad would interact with him and be harsh with him at times, play with him at times in ways that he didn't with me. Just didn't seem to be very concerned with what was happening with Erik. He might, if he was in a bad mood, he might slap Erik or push Erik away. If he was in a good mood, he might hang out with Erik. But it was different. Like, I had to be doing something. I was achieving something or something of importance. And it was very different.
So you had more attention. Would you say there were more expectations of you also?
Definitely.
Was one of the things that your father made decisions about with regard to your sports training the food that you would eat?
Yes.
And throughout your childhood, did his ideas about the proper foods change?
Not too much. I mean, it was always very important to him.
Okay. And what was the instruction with regard to food? Were you told what you could eat?
Yes.
Were you told when you could eat it?
No. I mean, there were some meals he felt it depended on what was happening that day. If there was a practice, it would be 3 hours before. He wouldn't tolerate 2.5 hours. It would be 3. And then there would be certain foods involved. And if there wasn't a practice and I was just going to school, I would just know the things that I had to stay away from or I had to eat.
Such as?
Stay away from sugar, dairy products. That changed because there were times when dairy products were a big thing. It depended on what he was reading, whatever was in the literature, if it was the Eat to Win diet, if it was something else. Usually he had books that would list what you have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then like strategies for how early. But he changed his philosophy a lot, because I remember him reading about Pancho Gonzalez would fast during the tournament. And so I did that for a period of time where I would just not eat for 12 hours at a time, have a small meal, not eat all day again. That wasn't working very well, so we switched.
How old were you when you were doing the Pancho Gonzalez fasting program?
13, when I was just becoming real competitive.
And you were playing a lot of tennis at that time, I take it?
Yes. It was only tennis at that point.
How many hours a day were you playing tennis?
At 13?
Yes.
Probably like 40, 45 hours a week.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. 4 or 5 hours?
45, 40 hours a week.
40 to 45 hours a week? And this is and you're 13 and you're going to school also? Yes?
Yes.
Now, did you sit down and talk with your dad about these food programs and sort of decide together what you were going to do in terms of your diet? Or did he decide?
I could pick out foods from the different categories.
When you said he wanted you to stay away from sugar, from junk food, that was an important theme with him, I take it.
Yes.
And If you violated that rule, would he enforce the rules?
Well, sometimes I violated the rule, yeah, and he would enforce the rules.
Was there a situation where you bought some food during the time you were playing soccer that you weren't supposed to buy?
Yes.
How old were you?
I was about 11, almost.
And what happened?
Is it at the Lawrenceville Deli? At the Lawrenceville Deli, we stopped there routinely on the way from or to the soccer fields from where our house was in Pennington. And my dad would be buying the things he felt he wanted for me, and the guy behind the counter was very friendly. They'd had the place forever, and he knew me every time I came in my soccer clothes. Basically, he sneaked me in a bag, some pastries and cookies and stuff. He just sort of put it in with everything else my dad was buying, and I took it out when my dad wasn't looking.
Did your dad find him?
He found them on me outside the store.
Were you eating them?
I was eating them, yes.
And what did your dad do?
He just grabbed him out of my hand, and he just grabbed me by the neck. He just punched me in the stomach.
Did he say anything?
No, he dragged me to the car, and I don't believe that he said anything. And I knew what was obvious.
Excuse me, Your Honor, could you ask the witness to keep your voice up?
Yes, if you could speak up a little bit.
The picture that's up on the board with you in the yellow shirt, is that in the back seat of a car?
Yes.
And is that your father with you?
Yes.
And does that scene look familiar to you?
Yes.
After you, is that the shirt of a soccer team you played for?
That's the Swiss Bakery and Deli.
And that was the soccer team?
Yeah, that's one of the house league teams, not the all-star team that this picture is in here. There would be like 16 teams in the house league. Lots of boys would play, and myself. And then they would pick certain players to play on like an all-star team. This was one of the house league games. And we would wear the T-shirt of the sponsor, and that would be the sponsor.
And after you played soccer, would your dad talk to you about what your performance had been?
Yes.
And was it supportive, like you did a great thing today, or I'm really proud of you, or what would be the tone of those conversations?
No, he didn't believe in that. We worked on different aspects of the game, what I could have done. There was always things that I could have done much better. Depended if we won or lost. If we had won, if I'd scored a goal or so, and usually in these games I would score a goal or do something significant probably, and we would just focus on the other things that I should have done better. It wouldn't be so bad.
You said your dad didn't believe in things like that when I asked you if he said complimentary things. What do you mean he didn't believe in things like that?
He just didn't believe in praise. He just felt that you just have to keep going to the next level of play so we could get to where we wanted to go. And that wasn't going to happen with wasting time, patting ourselves on the back, and, just losing our focus on what we had as a goal. And so I never looked for praise.
Did you feel like there was a lot of pressure to live up to your dad's expectations?
There's tremendous pressure.
Did you think you could ever meet his expectations?
No. And I don't think he felt I could either.
Can I have the dad's picture? Here, and I have 3 additional pictures which I've shown to the prosecution that I'd like to have marked as next in order.
All right, starting at 216 would be the next exhibit.
some point, did you start playing tennis?
Yes.
And how old were you when you started playing tennis?
I started late, like, but I started about 6.
Put some photographs up here.
Yeah.
Do you recognize these photographs?
Yeah.
What do you recognize them to be?
That's John Camp, my coach at that time, and that's me on the right. I don't know who the other boy is. Well, that looks like 6 years old. I'm just starting.
And is this were these the first formal tennis lessons you had?
Yes.
And did your dad work with you in the park before that?
Yes.
How long before you were taking these formal lessons at 6 did you start practicing with your dad in the park?
We practiced for a long time. He wanted me to learn the basics the way he wanted me to learn the basics before I went to another coach who started me a different way. And he also wanted me to get to a certain skill level where I could play with the older kids and didn't waste time with the very basic stuff that some of the coaches wanted to do, depending on the coach. But he was a really nice, softer guy and took the kids through slowly. So my dad, because we used to watch, we'd go over and we sort of watch at first because my dad would play. And he decided that we would work first on the public courts and get to a certain level, and then I could join into these drills that he really wanted me to be involved in. So you
were here when your cousin Alan Anderson testified.
Right.
About playing tennis at the park. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yes.
And he indicated when you first started playing, you couldn't hold a racket with one hand. Is that correct?
That's right.
Why?
Well, I was 6, and I wanted to use a junior racket. I'm actually using a junior racket in that picture, which John had at the club. And those are the types of things that John would do that my dad hated. He wanted me to use a full-size racket, and we
say he wanted you to use a full-size racket. Who wanted you to use a full-size racket?
My dad wanted me to use a full-size racket. And we would wrap the grip up a little bit higher, and I would hold the racket choked so that I could hold it
with 2 hands?
with 2 hands on both sides.
Were you too small to hold it with 1 hand?
Yes.
During the course of your playing tennis, did you have a series of coaches?
Yes.
Did you make a list at one point in time of all the coaches you could think of?
Yes.
And about how many were on there? Did you have 5 coaches or 10 coaches or 20 coaches?
No, I could remember like about 55 coaches. But I know I missed a lot because they kept coming, another one would come back to me every once in a while.
Would you have more than one coach at a time?
Yes.
And did you get to form any close relationships with any of these coaches?
Some of them. I mean, not really. I did have a close relationship to some degree with Brad Warner because I went to him for a long period of time. This guy was very nice to me because he would stand up to my dad somewhat, but I didn't really know him in any way.
Did your dad encourage you to get close to your coaches?
No. No, we went through coaches, it was high turnover with coaches. And if one started getting too friendly, talked to my mom too much, he was gone. And we just get another one.
And what if you started to get close?
Rephrase the question, please.
Who picked the coaches? Did you get to say, I like this coach, I'd like to keep him, or was this a decision your dad made?
No, my dad would, either my dad or my mom would find the coach, and then I would have my first lesson, and that's when I would meet him.
And during your early years, say before you were 10, how many hours a day would you say, or how many hours a week would you say you were playing tennis before you're 10?
Before I was 10? Well, we played a lot more in the summer than in the winter. In the summer, we would split it up between the 3 sports, and I would play a little each day. And I would hit tennis almost every day. Certainly by the time I was 7, I was playing almost every day. And really, my dad was focusing on tennis and soccer because I was having a very hard time with swimming. And I might play several hours in a row, maybe like 4 hours, and then we would switch and play some soccer, or he would go over a tape. He had soccer tapes, and then maybe we would go to the pool because we would be hot and sweaty, and then we would train in the pool for some swimming. During the school year, it was regimented because we had court time, swimming time, and I think I played tennis like 3-4 times a week, sometimes more on the weekends. And then there would be times when my dad would just decide I'd play tennis all day, and I'd do that.
In addition to the playing of tennis, you said he had tapes. Would he go over tapes with you in the various sports?
Yes, we had lots of tapes on each sport.
And would you just sit down together, father and son, and watch the tapes, or would this be some sort of a teaching session?
There would be training tapes. They would be, I used to go to a soccer camp, Patamale soccer camp, and they would furnish us with tapes there. They would have tapes of South American players giving instruction, Pele, other well-known players, I don't remember the names, but they would also have some basic American soccer instruction tapes, which weren't too good. But then we would have the tennis tapes. That would be the most extensive because he would tape all the matches, the great matches, and he would have parts segmented for me to watch, or games, or he would have the slow motion button and we would watch the service motion or whatever it was. He also had specific, like they were called Cybervision tapes made by Stan Smith, Bob Lutz, which would actually be like computerized stroking tapes and actual play that you only see like dots of the body. And I would imitate that, and we would just go through it instructionally.
Now, when you say you would imitate it, while the tape was going on, would you be doing something, or just sitting there, or?
No, we would be watching intently, and he would be telling me, see that, you know. And sometimes I would have the button. He would say, go back, and he would go over to the TV, and he would point to the form, see how his elbow's bent. Your elbow drops too much. You have to keep it up. A million things that would just be technical oriented.
Now, when you would watch these tapes, would this be a 15-minute session or something longer?
Sometimes. A lot of times, like in Pennington, we would run in from practice. If I had done something wrong, he would say, come on. And we would go into the house, turn on the tape, and he'd find the segment that pertained to whatever I had done wrong or he wanted me to do. And then we would go back out. Other times it would just be at night. If it was raining and we were supposed to play outside or something like that, any kind of filler time, we would just watch the tapes. We watched the same tapes over and over and over.
Do you have time to go play with the kids in the neighborhood?
Very occasionally played the baseball on the cul-de-sac. with a guy named Jerry, older kid, who let me play. And I knew another kid across the street named Tom, who was more friends with Eric, or they would occasionally play or something. But pretty much we weren't allowed off the property. And we stayed in the backyard, which had fences.
Did you have other kids come over and play with you, come in the house?
Jerry came in the house occasionally until the dog attacked him.
Was this in Muncie?
Yes.
And was the dog who attacked him Con?
Yes.
And was Con the relative of the dog who bit you on the face?
Yes.
You have a scar on your right cheek?
Yeah.
From that dog bite? So after Con attacked Jerry, was that the end of Jerry coming in the house?
Yes, it was. He was just traumatized by it because the dog was let in, and this dog was ferocious. If it smelled another person in the house, it just tore down the stairs, and he was playing ping pong with me. It came running down the stairs and just bit him in the groin, and it was this huge dog fight, and my mom separated Jerry and the dog and got the dog by the jaws, and Jerry left, and I almost never saw him again.
Jerry, you mean?
Yeah.
The dog stayed with you, though?
Yeah.
Did you eventually have to get rid of the dog?
Eventually, the police said that we had to destroy Con because of various violent incidences with the dog and other dogs and other people. And my dad didn't want to do that, and he had this idea that if he gave it away for a while, he might be able to get it back when things calmed down. So we gave it to a family that had, I think, much older kids. I think they were college kids or whatever, on like a farm type of. And then I heard that the dog had been destroyed eventually for more problems.
Getting back to your tennis. When you would be playing, when you would be practicing, would your father be there participating in your practices?
In tennis?
Yes.
Not every time, but most of the time my dad was there. Anytime he could be there, he would be there.
And when you were playing in tournaments, was your father there?
Yes, or he would fly in, and a lot of times I remember I would start the first couple points, and then I'd see my dad show up in a business suit, having just arrived.
Would you be glad to see him?
Yes.
Did he make it more fun for you to be in tournaments?
No.
Why not?
Well, whenever my dad was around, it was very heavy pressure, and I preferred to be just with the coach. But for some reason, when I was away from my dad, I had trouble playing. And so I remember the semifinals of one big championship tournament with a rival that I had beaten earlier in the spring in front of my dad easily. This was a big match. There were like 50 people watching, and I lost 6-0, 6-0. And my coach looked at me like, oh my God, how are we going to tell your dad? And, he was like pale, and sometimes I just couldn't play if my dad was not there, and I don't know, sometimes it was the nerves of just having to explain to him the match.
What do you mean, explain to him the match? If your father wasn't there, would you have to tell him about the match?
Every game, exactly how the match progressed.
Now, when you say exactly how the match progressed, would you call your father at work or see him when he got home? How would you tell him?
I call him immediately. He wanted to know immediately.
So would he be at work?
He would normally be either at home, or sometimes he would be, I guess at tournaments he was mostly at work, but I call him after practices, and I would be playing late, and he would get home and expect a call from either the coach or from me. Well, we reach him at the office. His secretary would always say he's out to lunch, he's busy. As soon as he found out it was my tennis coach, oh, he just walked in, and then he'd want everything, you know, exactly the temperament.
Tell me what you would tell him.
He would talk to the coach first, and I could hear my coach saying, you know, he did real well. I know it was a close match, depending on whatever happened. Just describe the match, kind of. And then he'd say, you know, your father wants to talk to you. And Dad would ask me to have the coach leave the room so he could talk to me in private. And he would say, tell me what happened. You know, I heard this, what happened. I want to know, why did this happen this way? As far as, to give you examples, like, he would say, you know, you elected to serve first. And I'd say yes. And he'd say, okay. He said, did you go through the first 3 games like we arranged? Because he would have, like, exactly what I was supposed to do for, like, the first almost 25 points, where I would just have a set strategy. You know, sometimes it would go off during the point, but pretty much I would either serve and volley to the deuce court, stay back on the ad court, and if it was 30-all, he'd have different strategies. And I'd explain to him how I followed those strategies, and he'd want to know why they didn't work out. And I'd do my best to explain in a way that didn't admit that my backhand was off or that I wasn't concentrating or things like that.
Now, would these be conversations that would last 2 or 3 minutes, or how long would you be explaining in detail what happened?
An hour and a half. About an hour and a half, because we'd also then have to go into what was happening tomorrow. He'd want to know exactly what I ate that day. Maybe it was the food that affected the match. And I would write out what I ate every time I was away from him, so we could chart whether, you know, only bananas and so on in the morning seemed to be a winning percentage and so on. And I actually purchased a computer at one point that you could plug all these things in, and it would give you the percentages of what happened when you ate this or when you tried this strategy or how many unforced errors. And very, very, very technical with my dad.
At one point, were you the #1 player in the Middle States Tennis Association?
Yes.
Now, what is the Middle States Tennis Association? What area does that cover?
That's the 5 states, most in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Delaware.
And how old were you when you were #1 in that area?
I was 17, I think. My first year of the 18 and unders.
So everybody eligible to play in that would have been 18 or younger.
Right.
And you were 17 when you won.
Right.
And do you remember when you won that? Do you remember that period of time?
I remember the year.
Do you remember, was your dad proud of you? Had you finally done enough?
He was proud of me, but by the time I could get to be #1, I mean, we were thinking nationally, and nationally I was not where he wanted me to be. So we didn't really worry about like the 5 states thing. We concentrated on the nation, what the other players were doing, and I was having trouble nationally, and that was always on his mind.
So this wasn't a great moment for you then? I mean, making a #1 ranking in the Middle States Tennis Association was not that important. Did it seem to be?
Rephrase the question, please.
Yeah, did it seem to be important? I mean, did your dad seem to be real happy about this? Or?
He really didn't say much about it. It just happened. The rankings came up. I noticed I was #1, but again, we were thinking nationally. It was like, you know, so what? And yeah, that was an upsetting year because we had lost again Family of the Year tennis for New Jersey to a family called the Leshleys, and my dad was pissed, and my mother called in and to complain and the whole thing, because my brother had a very good year that year also. But we lost that, so he was very upset. Basically, was upset with my brother for not having been number one also, which would have clinched it. And he was like 5 or something, 4 or 5.
So your brother was number 4 or 5. If he'd been number 1, it would have clinched it, meaning you would have gotten the tennis family of the year?
Right.
Why don't you pick a point here when it's convenient, we'll take a break.
One more question, and then
Okay.
we'll take a break. Did your sports activities seem to take up all of your dad's free time?
It took up any time he wasn't working. Yeah.
And did your mother ever express any resentment about that?
Oh, yes, many, many times.
What would she say?
She would say many things. She would say that I ruined her life, and she would explain to me why and how I ruined her life.
What would she tell you about why and how you ruined her life?
Well, if she wasn't in a tantrum and she was just speaking normally, she would just explain all the things that she could have been: an actress, broadcasting. I learned about her aspirations with disappointments with not being a child actress and wanting to go on in some acting or broadcasting sense. And she told me that she had a job in New York to be a hostess at a restaurant, that she said she could make almost $50,000 a year, and that then suddenly she had gotten pregnant, that she had not wanted to get pregnant, that my dad had then forced her, well, gave her an ultimatum: either you leave or you stay home with my son and quit. And so she chose to stay home, and essentially her life was pretty much ruined from that point on. But then we would have more discussions about how much money was being spent on my tennis, all my dad's time on my tennis, who cares, and then I would hear about the lessons she couldn't have, the things that she couldn't have. And then there would be other times when she was in a tantrum. Then it would just come out very, in a rage.
What would come out in a rage?
She would be throwing things and screaming and flailing and wanting and trying to hit you and saying that you're a bastard. And she cursed a lot. And that wait till your dad gets home, I'll tell him the things that you didn't do today, and I wish you were never born, and why can't you be like your brother, and what's the matter with you? And then I would try to say something. She would say, shut up, I don't want to hear it. You're stupid, I hate you.
How old were you when you heard things like, I wish you were never born?
Seven.
Okay. That's the end of that area now.
Okay, we'll take a recess, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll resume at 15 minutes after the hour. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 3:15. And all the jurors are back in court, and we're ready to proceed. The witness is on the witness stand. You may proceed with your questioning.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lyle, as you were growing up, and I'm directing your attention now to when you were living in the Muncie house and then later in the Pennington house, were there pornographic films that were made available to you and your brother?
Yes.
And where did these films come from?
My dad brought them home with other videos.
And would you and your brother sneak and watch them, or how would you see them?
No, my dad would, we would just watch them together.
With your dad? And what's the earliest age that you remember being shown films like this?
I remember some films in Muncie at the end. Mostly I remember in Pennington House.
And what types of things would be portrayed in these films?
It was mostly violence, sexual violence. I remember a whole bunch of the films. There would be films with gang rapes. There was one film centered around a woman that was riding her bike and was abducted and brought to a forest and gang raped. And there was another different film where there was females, 3 females attacking another female, and the same in the men's locker room with 3 guys and another guy, violent sexual acts. And there was another film that it was like a film within a film, where this filmmaker was making a lot of money selling these violent sexual pornography that he would take place in a red room. And then the premise of the film is they eventually find out that the killings and the sexual violence in the red room is real, and that's why the films are so good. And there were lots of them.
Did your father show these films to other people beside you and yourself and your mother?
Only as like in a just shock value.
How do you mean? Who would he show them to?
He showed them to that I remember Peter Goldsmith. He showed them to neighbors in the Pennington house when they would come over at times. It seemed like he would tell me in advance he was going to do this, and it was more to embarrass my mother than anything else. But he would just put on this video, and people would sort of settle in, and then he'd shock them. He showed them for some of my friends that would come over every once in a while. He'd just throw one on, and it really wasn't very bothered by him, and we would watch them together.
Do you ever take photographs of you and your brother?
Yes.
And what would the circumstances be in which he would take photographs?
He would take photographs of us, our private parts.
And would he have you come in and pose for these photographs, or how would that happen?
I would just, if we were in the showers or bathtub or changing, he would just use the same camera that my mother used, and then he would come in and take just a photograph or two, and he wouldn't say anything, and then he would leave.
Do you ever show you those photos?
No.
Excuse me. Here, I have some photographs. I have shown to the district attorney and King Martin for his permission.
How many are there? And just for the record, what are the markings that you put on them?
We have, may I do it from up here so I can show it to you all at the same time?
Okay, please refer to...
I'm sorry, Mr. Menendez.
all right.
Mr. Menendez, I'm showing you a Kodak color prints envelope with the number 219 on it. Would you take a look at that? Do you recognize the handwriting on the front?
That's my mother's.
And what does it say?
Eric's birthday, November 1976.
And in November 1976, how old would you have been?
8.
And on the back, there's a sticker that says address.
That's the Muncie house, 4 Harlow Lane, Muncie, New York.
Is there anything in that envelope at this time?
It's empty at
Okay.
this time, Your Honor.
All right.
The next would be,
Did you want to mark that envelope?
it's
As an
marked 219, Your Honor.
All right.
The next would be 220, which is a envelope containing negatives. Next is a series of small photographs, which we've marked 221A through G. A through H.
All right.
And then we have enlargements of those photographs, which we have marked 222 through 233. And we have a proof sheet of the negatives, which we've marked as 220, which is marked as 234. Mr. Menendez, have you been shown this proof sheet already?
Yes.
Your Honor, I now have the enlargements which go in order off of the proof sheet off the negative. Mr. Menendez, do you recognize this photograph?
Yes.
And who are the people in that photograph?
Mom and Dad, myself, the Baralt family, children, and Aunt Terry and Uncle Carlos.
Could you just identify that for the record so that we don't have...
222, Your Honor.
All right.
Showing you what we've marked as 223. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes.
And who is that?
That's me.
$224.
That's Eric.
$225.
What was the answer?
I don't know.
It's nothing, Your Honor. Nobody can recognize. It's just the next photo on the negative. $226.
That's Eric and myself and some other boys.
You have to
And-
speak up.
Some other boys and Eric and myself. Sorry.
And do you recognize some mark on your brother?
The birthmark? The birthmark on his right wrist. It's a large brown birthmark.
$227.
That's my father and Eric at a birthday party.
$228.
That looks like the same party with Eric and myself.
$229.
The same picture, I think, but darker.
$230.
The same picture, basically.
$231.
Looks like my mother in the background, lower half of her, and my brother with a donut.
$232.
That's Eric.
How do you recognize him?
The birthmark on his right hand.
And $233.
That's the little dog I was talking about, Tristesse.
Your Honor, may I take a moment and put the photos up?
Yes.
Now, when you said that your dad would come in periodically and just take pictures of you, the two photographs here we've marked, one which you've identified as yourself and the other one as Eric, which are children without clothes, also appear to be children without heads. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when he would take photographs of you of this nature, would he seem to be directed at taking photos of your faces?
No.
What would he?
He would take photographs of your genital area, the lower half of your body, or you bending over, or just different parts of your positions is what I never really knew.
Because you never saw them afterward, or is that yes?
He would be focused on those areas, but I didn't see I've never seen these pictures.
Is today the first time you've seen these pictures? Is that yes?
Yes.
Did your dad used to have talks with you about sex between men?
Yes.
And what types of situations would he talk to you about?
He would talk about the bonding between men, going into battle or in competitions, mostly with regards to battle and history, and that sexual interaction and touching and hugging, but also sex was throughout history was something that men that had gone into battle had done together. Had me read passages about it.
What do you mean, had you read passages about it? What would he give you to read?
Excuse me, Your Honor, can we have a time for it, please?
Yes.
What time are we talking about in your life?
Talking about when I was 6.
What would he have you read?
He had history books with passages outlined, various battles and strategy, but in terms of on this subject, there would be particular passages about Greeks, soldiers having had sex with each other before they went into battle as a way of bonding with each other so they have a stronger connection. And he would talk about the same thing with regards to sports and he and I.
And did he talk about fathers and their firstborn sons in this regard?
Not in this. Not that that's what. I'm not understanding the question.
Did he talk about? You said he talked about soldiers and having sex between them as a bonding mechanism.
Yes.
Did he talk about teachers and students?
No.
Did he
Oh, yes, he did actually. Not teachers. He talked to me about. I don't know. They were like lecturers or traveling lecturers, professors, and they would have arrangements with very close special students, young boys, and they would have sex and they would touch each other.
And did he talk about it with regard to fathers and sons?
He talked about it with regard to our relationship as being very special and our family history with the firstborn and the father.
And what was special about the relationship of the firstborn and the father?
That it was special, and that that was really all that mattered, was the firstborn, and that the sons should do what the fathers say, and then they grow up and they become like the father, and the father teaches them, molds them, and And someday, me and my son do the same.
And between the ages of 6 and 8, did your father have sexual contact with you?
Yes.
And how did it start?
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. It began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
Did you want to do this? At some point, did he do some other things to you?
Yes.
What else did he do to you?
He used objects.
What kind of objects?
A toothbrush and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions, and just slide my pants down or take my pants off. Sometimes it'd be for a short period of time, sometimes longer. Just lay me on the bed and he'd have a tube of Vaseline, and he just played with me.
And was there some point in time when he decided to use something besides the toothbrush?
Yes.
And did he try to anally penetrate you with something else?
He did.
And what was it?
He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
Did you ask him not to?
Yes.
How did you ask him not to?
I just told him, I don't. I'm sorry. I just told him that I didn't want to do this and that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
Was that important to you, that he loved you?
Yes, very. But I still didn't want to do it.
Did you tell your mom?
Yes.
What did you say to your mom?
I told her to tell Dad to leave me alone. And he keeps touching me.
What did your mom say?
She told me to stop it. And that I was exaggerating. And that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
Did you ever tell anybody else?
When?
Did you ever tell anybody else when you were a child? You heard Diane Vandermolen testify. Do you
Yes.
remember telling her?
No.
Did you complain to your cousin Alan?
No, not about that.
Just about punishment. As a child, did you ever tell anybody else what had happened with your dad?
Yes. As a child, no.
Why not?
I was afraid, and my dad didn't want me to.
What did he tell you about telling people?
He just said that it was our secret. That bad things would happen to me if I told anybody. And I told him I never would.
How old were you when this stopped?
8.
So during the time between 6 and 8, when this was going on, did you tell your brother?
No.
Did you do something to your brother?
Yes.
What did you do to your brother?
I took him out to the woods. Whenever I felt, I don't know, I took him out sometimes, and I took a toothbrush also, and I played with Eric in the same way. And I'm sorry.
It stopped for you with your dad when you were 8. When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Eric.
And did you do something about it?
Yes.
What did you do?
I talked to my dad.
What did you say to your dad?
I told him that I knew what was going on with him and Eric, and I heard noises, and that I wanted him to leave Eric alone.
And what did he say to you?
He told me that Erik made things up sometimes, but that it would stop, and that we should keep it just between us, or he'd kill me.
Did you ever tell anybody what you thought was going on?
No, I told him I would never tell anybody. I just wanted to stop.
Did he tell you it would stop?
He did.
Leonard, that's as far as I have for today, if that's all right.
All right, do you want to take a recess then at this
Yes.
point? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will recess until Monday at 9 o'clock. I want to remind all of you not to discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form any final opinions about this case. Don't permit yourself to be exposed to anything at all that relates to this case outside of the courtroom. As I've said many times, you must make your decision based only on the evidence presented to you in the courtroom and my instructions on the law. We'll be in recess until Monday at 9 o'clock. Everyone have a good weekend. We'll see you back here then.
That's all for this week. For more on the Menendez brothers murder trial, check out the show notes where you can find their full trial to stream for free, as well as updates in their cases. And for the latest in current true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight on my shows, Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan at 8 p.m. Eastern and Vinnie Politan Investigates at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.